Hey AP Econ, this is going to be a review of this worksheet as well as a couple of the concepts while I review the worksheet of aggregate supply, aggregate demand, shifters, what's happening with the graph. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about classical versus Keynesian, etc. Just a little bit of a review. My hope is if you're getting this all right, you totally get it, you can kind of fast forward it. If there's something I review that maybe you'd benefit from hearing again, you could rewind it. And then if you complete it, you go through this review. If you have additional questions, you can hit me up by email. You can hit me up by on Schoology. You can hit me up during the class times on Google Meet or whatever we're using. But anyway, here we go. First off, just to review, looking at this graph, I guess this would theoretically be our long-run aggregate supply curve. We know that this is theoretically equilibrium. Just a little review, going back just for the heck of it, is looking at this graph here. We can look at this short-run aggregate supply curve and know that we're looking at something like a classical curve. It doesn't have that, that bottom out here. It doesn't top up here. Okay, so we're looking at a classical curve. If the economy, looking at this first one, obviously here's our equilibrium. If we were looking at this one and if the price level was at P1, okay, we know that at that high price level, theoretically, people wouldn't buy very much. I mean, this is kind of like taking microeconomics and applying it to macro. And of course, companies would want to make a whole lot. That would theoretically cause a surplus, and naturally companies would then lower their prices, bring us back to equilibrium. Again, I'm kind of taking a micro concept that we learned in a market, in an industry, and theoretically the same thing would happen here in an entire economy. And then finally, if the price was set at P2, we know that at P2 the price would be so low, everybody would want to buy everything, and companies wouldn't want to produce that many, so there would be a shortage. At that low price, companies would know to raise their prices, and we'd all, the invisible hand would magically bring us back to that equilibrium. So just taking kind of a micro concept and applying it to this graph. Okay, all right. Next, we get to, out of the four possible shifts, see if I can get everything in screen here. Out of the four possible shifts of aggregate demand and aggregate supply, which is the most destructive to an economy? Draw and label that shift up here. Okay, so let's review the shifts a little bit. First off, keep in mind that a shift of aggregate demand, is kind of what we're going to see with fiscal policy now, with the federal government spending a bunch of money, also with monetary policy, the Fed infusing a lot of money, an increase in aggregate demand, an increase in consumption, investment, government, or exports, or a decrease, okay? We know that would theoretically raise the price level, raise the GDP, or lower the price level, lower the GDP. And then, of course, we have the short-run aggregate supply curve. Okay, if resource prices get cheaper, or taxes go down, or of course, a long-run shift and short-run shift would be better technology, stuff like that. But an increase of the short-run aggregate supply curve would decrease prices and increase GDP. The worst shift of everything is a decrease in short-run aggregate supply. Okay, and so I've drawn and labeled that shift, and we should all know just as a term that is called stagflation. Okay, and the reason that it's such a problem for the economy, it's kind of like the nasty double whammy, is that it raises price level and at the same time decreases production, decreases GDP. Okay, so in this case, the government can't just theoretically simply fix the problem by, increasing or decreasing aggregate demand, because there's already inflation and there's lower production at that point. Okay, the things that can cause that shift would be like a war, halfway across the world, a disruption to the oil supply, just generally prices going up. Okay, so we should know that that is a nasty shift that we kind of have to have to know about and be wary of. Okay, all right, moving right along. Here is a nice little time for us to review the multiplier and just a little bit about how to apply the multiplier. Okay, first off, we see these problems and it's giving you an MPC. We should always know that whenever you're given an MPC or an MPS, that the other one, MPC, MPS, the other one is corresponding. Okay, so if MPC is 0.75, this is real easy. We know that MPS is 0.25. Now, what this means is that this society's marginal propensity to consume and their marginal propensity to save, it's always going to add up to be 1. When people get additional money, they're going to either spend it or they're going to save it. Okay, so in this theoretical society, and we know that we're using this for fiscal policy here, okay, in this theoretical society, when people get additional money, they're going to spend 75 cents out of every dollar. They're going to save 25 cents. Okay, now the way that we take this and we get our multiplier is, we know that our spending multiplier is 1 over MPS, 1 over 0.25, which is 4. And we know that since the first round of taxing, or the first round of spending would count towards GDP, but the first round of taxing would not, our taxing multiplier, it's always negative and it's always 1 less. Okay, so that's how we would apply it. Okay, so if our economy is producing $100 billion over our long-run aggregate supply, how much should the government cut spending to get rid of the inflationary gap? Just for the heck of it, because I do want this to be a review for those of you that are really paying attention to this. Let's graph what I just described here. I might need a pen for this. Oh crap, let's go. Oh, shoot. Okay. I didn't cuss, did I? Okay. Price level. Okay. So right now the economy is producing $100 billion over our long-run aggregate supply. Boom. Okay, so there's a theoretical $100 billion gap between where we are now and, and our long-run capability. Obviously, just to review a term, that means that right now we are in an inflationary gap. And if the federal government, Congress, the president worked so well that they computed this and they decided that right now we're $100 billion over where we should be, and they would get together and they would purposely lower GDP and increase unemployment to bring us back here. That's what AP Econ wants us to think happens. Here's the deal. We would apply this spending or this taxing multiplier to make up that gap. Okay, so this time we have a $100 billion gap. Our spending multiplier is 4. So, of course, that means they would cut spending by 25 billion. Okay, so 25 billion cut in spending times our multiplier of 4 would give us that $100 billion inflationary gap that the government would want to cut their way out of. Okay, that's how we would do that problem. All right, let's take a look at another one and see if we can figure it out. All right, so in this society, the MPC is 0.8, which means that the MPS is 0.2. Again, theoretically, we've already figured this out, and we're reviewing it, but who knows? Okay, the government decides to impose a $50, does that really say a $50? Goodness, I was hoping that maybe that should be millions or billions. But anyway, so 1 over 0.2, 1 over our MPS gives us our spending multiplier. So that's 5. If this was a taxing problem, that means that our taxing multiplier would be -4. We would apply it into, this formula the same way. Okay, so if the government increases taxes, the government increases, we are going to mess with taxes here. If the government increases taxes by $50, and we would multiply it by -4, God, I'm doing math now on the fly on video. So that would affect the economy -$200. And of course, if we put millions or billions in front of that, it would probably make more sense. Okay, so there's some examples of how we can apply the multiplier to, to account for an inflationary or recessionary gap, or to compute how much a taxing increase or a spending increase or decrease, whatever, would theoretically affect the economy as a whole. Okay? All right, moving on to a little review of just how some of these actions would affect GDP. Okay, and I'm just going to go through, I'm going to mark the shift and give it a quick explanation. If Congress passes a tax cut for the middle class, theoretically, that would increase aggregate demand. It would increase aggregate demand because it would increase consumption, the C in the CIGXN. And we see that that would increase both the price level and the real GDP. Okay, during a recession, the government increases spending on schools. Okay, so if the government increases spending, that's also going to increase aggregate demand. And that, instead of consumption, which was the last one, this is just simply government. All right, next one. Oil discoveries. Decrease energy prices. Okay, so lower energy prices. Energy prices are like the universal supply or the universal input, kind of along with labor. So if energy prices goes down, everything can be produced cheaper. Okay, so we know that prices go down and GDP goes up. That's why that's such a great shift for the economy. Okay, next. Oh God, that's like that, guys. That one's like too easy. That's insulting. All right, next. Okay, an increase in production costs. If everything gets more expensive to produce, here is your stagflation. Okay, productivity going up. We know decreases prices and increases production, which is why it's what we're looking for. Okay, if everybody is more confident, consumers and businesses, then both consumption and investment spending is going to go up. And for that reason, aggregate demand goes up, of course, increasing both prices and GDP. All right, next one. Reduces personal taxes and increases spending. Okay. Obviously, that is going to take us out of equilibrium, and boom. Okay. An increase in labor productivity increases short-run aggregate supply, hopefully long-run as well. No change in the aggregate demand curve. The aggregate supply curve is going to increase. real GDP is going to increase, price level is going to decrease, and unemployment's always going to do kind of the opposite of real GDP. So unemployment's going to go down. Okay? These two are always going to be polar opposites. Just get ready for that. Okay? The opposite. Stagflation. All right, there we go. Guys, let me know if you have any questions about this. Feel free to kind of go back and review it as you see fit. And, you know, if this is something that works for you, I'll be happy to make videos of anything like that that we complete. Kind of like I said, I'm going to kind of keep working on ways to instruct and make sure you have an opportunity to review stuff. Okay? Have a great day, guys.